The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden streaks across the quiet streets of the town. People were finishing their work, children were returning home from school, and the usual hum of cars on the road gave life to the neighborhood. Among them was a woman driving her small sedan carefully along the main avenue. She was tired from a long day at work, her mind already drifting to dinner plans and a warm shower, but she maintained her usual alertness while navigating through traffic. Her face was calm, her hands steady on the steering wheel, and her eyes were focused on the road. She had always believed in following the rules, being patient with people and treating everyone with respect. Life had taught her that kindness and caution went a long way. As she approached an intersection, she noticed a police car parked near the side of the road. It was nothing unusual. Traffic enforcement officers often sat there during peak hours, but as she drove past, her instincts told her something was off. The officer inside was staring directly at her, his eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing something she didn't understand. She shook her head slightly and focused on the road, thinking she might be imagining it. Still, the feeling of unease lingered like the quiet tension before a storm. A few blocks later, she saw flashing lights in her rearview mirror. The familiar red and blue reflection danced on her windshield. She felt a knot form in her stomach even though she hadn't done anything wrong. Pulling over to the side of the road, she rolled down her window and waited, keeping her hands on the steering wheel. The officer approached with measured steps, a stern expression on his face. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said, though the tone carried a subtle edge that made her tense. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" She shook her head slowly. "No, officer. I'm not sure. Is there a problem?" Her voice was calm but polite. He looked her over, his gaze lingering a little too long. "You were swerving slightly back there. I need to see your license and registration." She handed over the documents without hesitation. Her heart beat steadily, but a quiet worry nagged at the back of her mind. She had always been cautious, aware of how the world could judge people unfairly, especially people who looked like her. She had grown up learning to respect authority, but also to protect herself, to stay alert and to trust her instincts. The officer took her paperwork and walked back to his car. She watched him through the window, her fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. The minutes seemed to stretch longer than usual. She could feel every second weighing down on her, like a silent pressure building around her. She reminded herself to stay composed. Losing her temper wouldn't help anyone. Inside the police car, the officer glanced at her information, his expression unreadable. He muttered something into his radio, though she couldn't hear the words clearly. Something about the way he spoke made it seem as though he was setting up a story that wasn't real. She tried to push the thought away, but the unease lingered. She remembered stories she had heard from friends and neighbors, situations where innocent people were unfairly treated. She hoped this wouldn't be one of those stories, that perhaps this was just a routine check. After a few more minutes, he returned to her car. "Step out of the vehicle, please," he commanded. She complied immediately, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, showing no resistance. Her hands were raised slightly empty as she walked to the side of her car. The officer circled around her, his eyes scanning her, not with suspicion, but with an attitude that felt more like accusation than concern. "I need you to be honest with me," he said. "Have you been drinking tonight? Any substances in your system?" She blinked, slightly taken aback. "No, officer. I haven't had anything to drink. I don't take drugs. I'm just driving home from work." He leaned in slightly, his tone sharp. "Are you sure about that? You seem nervous." "Most people who are honest don't act like this." She swallowed, keeping her voice steady. "I'm not nervous because of anything I've done. I want to make sure I'm following your instructions. I respect your job." He paused, watching her face as if searching for a crack in her composure, but she stayed calm, meeting his gaze steadily. She knew that any sign of panic or anger could be twisted against her. It was a silent battle of wills, a test she hadn't asked for but couldn't avoid. Nearby, a few pedestrians glanced at the scene, some whispering to each other, curious about the interaction. A young man on a bicycle slowed down, his eyes following the unfolding situation. He didn't intervene, but he stayed close enough to witness what was happening. She didn't know it yet, but these small, unnoticed witnesses would later play a role in ensuring justice. The officer circled her once more, his boots crunching on the asphalt. He made a few phone calls, his voice low, but sharp words occasionally leaked out, revealing frustration and impatience. It became clear to her that he wasn't just doing his job. There was something personal in his approach, something calculated. He wanted her to react, to give him an excuse to make trouble. Despite the tension, she maintained her composure. She remembered her mother's words from years ago. Always stay calm even when the world is unfair. You can't control what people do, but you can control how you respond. She repeated this silently to herself like a mantra. Minutes dragged on, and finally, the officer spoke again. I'm going to ask you to step back inside your car while I run a few more checks. She complied, keeping her movements careful and deliberate. Her heart still beat fast, but her face betrayed no fear. Inside, she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her, yet she refused to let it shake her spirit. As she sat in the driver's seat, she glanced at the dashboard camera she had installed months ago. It was a small precaution she had taken after hearing stories of false accusations. That little device, recording every detail, gave her a quiet reassurance. She knew that if anything happened, she had proof of her actions. She trusted it more than anything else in that moment. The officer returned, flipping through her documents once again. His expression was hard to read, a mixture of annoyance and something else she couldn't quite place. He asked a few more questions, each one seemingly designed to unsettle her. But she remained patient, answering honestly, carefully, and respectfully. She refused to give him the satisfaction of fear or anger. Finally, he stepped back, looking at her as if weighing his options. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy like a storm ready to break. She didn't speak, didn't move unnecessarily, and waited. She had been in situations before where calmness was her strongest weapon, and she relied on it now. The surrounding neighborhood returned to its ordinary rhythm, almost mocking the tension of the moment. Children's laughter echoed from a nearby playground. A dog barked in the distance, and a delivery truck rumbled down the street. Life went on around them, indifferent to the silent struggle between authority and fairness, between fear and dignity. As the officer finally walked back to his car, she exhaled slowly, though she remained seated, her body tense and ready. She knew this was far from over. The way he had looked at her, the way he had tried to unsettle her, told her that he wasn't finished. This wasn't just about traffic enforcement. It was about power, control, and bias, and she had become a target without reason. She adjusted her seat, glanced at the rearview mirror, and waited. She reminded herself that staying calm and observing everything carefully was her strongest tool. She couldn't control his actions, but she could control hers. Every word, every gesture mattered, and she intended to stay true to herself, no matter what came next. And in that moment, as the sun continued to dip lower and the shadows grew long, she realized something important. Life had thrown many challenges her way before, but this one required more than just patience. It required courage, quiet strength, and vigilance, and she was ready. She sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly but keeping her breathing steady. The police officer hadn't returned yet, and the seconds felt endless. She could hear the soft hum of traffic around her, the occasional bark of a dog, and distant voices from people walking down the street. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow felt closer. She knew she had done nothing wrong, yet the feeling of being watched, judged, and targeted pressed heavily on her. It was unsettling, but she refused to let it control her. Finally, the officer reappeared. This time, he didn't approach immediately. Instead, he stood beside his car, talking into his radio in a low, clipped voice. She could barely catch snippets of what he was saying, but it sounded like he was reporting something unusual. She felt her stomach tighten. She realized that he wasn't just following procedure. He was setting something up. Her heart sank, but she reminded herself to stay calm. She had faced unfairness before, and she had learned that panic never helped. The officer walked back to her car, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp, calculating. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm going to need you to step out again. This won't take long." She complied without hesitation, stepping out slowly and deliberately, her hands visible. "Of course, officer," she said politely. Her voice was steady even though her mind was racing. He circled her car, examining it with exaggerated attention. He tapped the windows, opened the door slightly, and peered inside. It felt like a performance, a show meant to unsettle her. She kept her gaze forward, refusing to react to his subtle intimidation. She had learned long ago that fear or anger could be used against you. She wasn't going to give him that. "Have you been anywhere unusual today?" he asked, leaning slightly toward her. She blinked, taken aback by the question. "I've just been at work and then running a few errands," she replied calmly. "Nothing unusual." He studied her for a moment, then smirked slightly as if he thought he had caught her in a lie. "Mind if I check your car?" he asked. Her heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice calm. "You may, officer." He opened the trunk and glanced inside, pretending to inspect it thoroughly, though she knew there was nothing to find. Every gesture he made was meant to make her feel guilty, as if she were hiding something. She watched quietly, her body tense but her mind alert. She knew he was trying to create a story that wasn't true, a story that could make her seem guilty in front of anyone who came along. Nearby, a man was walking his dog and noticed the interaction. He slowed down, sensing that something wasn't right. He didn't interfere, but his attention lingered, his phone in hand, ready to record if necessary. Another witness, a delivery driver, also glanced at the scene, curious. These small, unnoticed observers would later play a role in exposing the officer's behavior, though at that moment the woman couldn't know it. The officer returned to her, closing the trunk and folding his arms. "I'm going to need you to perform a few tests," he said. His voice was firm but carried an edge, as if he were daring her to refuse. She hesitated for only a moment before responding. "Officer, I haven't done anything wrong. I'll cooperate with what is reasonable, but I want to make sure my rights are respected." His expression flickered, a mix of annoyance and surprise. "I'm just doing my job," he said. "Step over here." She followed him a few steps, careful to stay calm and visible. He instructed her to perform some movements, asking her to walk a few steps, turn around, and speak certain phrases. Every instruction seemed designed to make her nervous, to trip her up. But she followed them carefully, deliberately, showing no fear. She understood that in situations like this, composure was more powerful than argument. The officer muttered into his radio again, his tone sharp and clipped. She couldn't hear exactly what he was saying, but she guessed it was a report about her behavior. She wondered if he was exaggerating, framing her actions to make her appear suspicious. The thought made her chest tighten, but she refused to let it show. After a few minutes, he paused and looked at her with an almost smug expression. "You're very calm for someone in this situation," he said. "Most people act differently." She took a deep breath. "I stay calm because I know I haven't done anything wrong. It's not easy to stay patient, but it's important." He nodded slowly, almost as if testing her further. "All right, you can get back in your car for now." She returned to the driver's seat, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She could feel her body tense from the ordeal, but her mind remained focused. She knew this wasn't over. The officer's actions had a calculated feel, like he was trying to catch her off guard, trying to set her up for something she hadn't done. She reminded herself to stay alert, to observe everything, and to remain calm. As she sat there, a car passed slowly by, and she noticed the young man on the bicycle from earlier glancing in her direction. His eyes lingered for a moment, and she realized he had seen the interaction. She felt a flicker of hope. If something went wrong, there were witnesses. Little by little, the sense of isolation began to ease. She wasn't entirely alone. The officer returned to his car again, making more calls and taking notes. She watched carefully, noting the time, the details, and every movement. She had always believed that preparation was important, and now she realized that her careful observations might make a difference. She could not control his intentions, but she could document her own actions and remain composed. That was her strength. After a few more minutes, he walked back and spoke again. "I need to check one more thing." "Step out of the car." She obeyed, keeping her movement slow and deliberate. Every step she took was intentional, meant to show compliance while maintaining dignity. The officer asked her to open the glove compartment and remove some items. She complied, her hands steady. She could feel the tension thick in the air, but she refused to let it intimidate her. While he examined the items, a car passed and someone inside glanced at the scene. Their curiosity was evident, and they slowed down, watching. The officer noticed too, his face hardening slightly. He muttered under his breath, clearly frustrated that people were paying attention. She watched him carefully, noting his impatience and the way he tried to control the narrative. He seemed to think that intimidation would work, that he could pressure her into making a mistake. But she had faced pressure before and had learned to stand firm. She knew that truth and patience were more powerful than aggression. Finally, the officer closed the glove compartment and folded his arms. All right, ma'am, he said. Everything seems fine for now. Drive safely. She nodded politely, relieved but still cautious. Thank you, officer. As she drove away, she kept her eyes on the road but reflected on what had just happened. She realized that this encounter was more than a routine traffic stop. It was an attempt to unsettle her, to manipulate the situation and to see her react in a way that could be used against her. She had stayed calm, but she knew that the battle was far from over. That evening, she told a close friend about the incident. Her friend listened carefully and suggested documenting everything, including the time, location, officer's badge number, and any witnesses. She agreed, feeling grateful for the advice. She also considered checking if her dashcam had recorded the interaction, hoping that it had captured everything clearly. As she reflected on the day, she realized that encounters like these were unfortunately common. Many people face situations where authority was misused, where bias affected judgment, and where simple acts of routine enforcement turned into moments of intimidation. She felt a quiet resolve building inside her. She would not allow this incident to define her or shake her confidence. She would act wisely, carefully, and truthfully, and she would make sure her story was heard. Late that night, she reviewed the footage from her dashcam. Every movement, every word, every subtle act of intimidation was captured clearly. She felt a mix of relief and determination. She had proof and she had maintained her dignity. Now it was a matter of ensuring that justice in some form would follow. She couldn't sleep easily that night. Her mind kept replaying the moments, analyzing every glance, every word, every gesture. But even in her exhaustion, she felt a sense of quiet strength. She had faced unfairness, bias, and intimidation, yet she had remained composed. She had not allowed fear to take over, and she had kept her integrity intact. The next day, she prepared herself mentally for the possibility of further encounters. She reviewed what had happened, noting every detail carefully. She knew that staying vigilant, documenting her actions, and remaining calm were her best tools. She also knew that her story might help others who had faced similar situations, showing that courage, patience, and composure could make a difference. And as she went about her day, she carried a quiet determination, a sense that she could face what was coming next with dignity and strength. She had survived the first encounter, and she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The day after the traffic stop began quietly, almost deceptively ordinary. The woman went about her routine, but a quiet unease lingered beneath her calm exterior. Every time she thought about the officer and the way he had tried to unsettle her, a shiver of frustration ran through her. She knew that what had happened wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. It was deliberate, calculated, and unfair, and although she had stayed composed, she understood that vigilance now was more important than ever. She decided to take extra precautions that day. Before leaving her home, she checked her dashcam footage carefully. Every moment of the stop, every movement and word of the officer was recorded in clear detail. Watching it, she could feel her blood boil slightly, not out of fear but from the realization that someone in authority had tried to manipulate her without reason. She reminded herself to focus, to act carefully, and to let evidence guide her path rather than emotions. After a few hours at work, she received a notification that made her stomach tighten. The police department had sent a letter indicating that there was a complaint about her driving, suggesting that she might need to appear at the station for questioning. Her first instinct was disbelief. She had done nothing wrong, yet the system seemed ready to pressure her just as the officer had tried on the street. She took a deep breath and reminded herself to remain calm. Panic would not help. Documentation, preparation, and composure were her allies. She arrived at the station, the building looming larger than it seemed from the outside. The walls, the uniformed officers, the official papers, all of it reminded her that authority could be intimidating, but she refused to let it define her. At the front desk, she explained her situation politely, providing the notice and her identification. She requested a clear explanation of why she had been summoned. The officer at the desk glanced at her briefly and directed her to wait. She found a chair and sat down, careful to maintain calm, aware of how her posture, expressions, and tone could influence the interaction. Around her, other citizens came and went, some nervous, some indifferent, but all caught up in their own concerns. She kept her attention focused on the situation at hand. Minutes felt long, but she reminded herself that patience was a form of strength. After some time, the same officer who had stopped her appeared in the room. His eyes briefly met hers, and she could see a flicker of irritation, almost like he had not expected her composure. He motioned for her to follow him into a small office. The walls were plain, the furniture minimal, creating a space where authority could feel overwhelming. She stepped in carefully, keeping her hands visible and her demeanor calm. "Have a seat," he said, though his voice carried a sharpness that made her uneasy. She complied immediately, sitting with poise and maintaining eye contact. "I see you've come prepared," he said, leaning back slightly. There was a strange mix of acknowledgement and irritation in his tone. She didn't respond with words. She had learned that staying silent and calm could sometimes be more powerful than argument. He opened a folder on his desk and flipped through the pages. "There's a complaint about your driving," he began. "Some people have said that you were swerving. Can you explain that?" She took a slow breath. "I've been driving carefully. I don't recall swerving in a way that would be unsafe. I also have dashcam footage that shows exactly what happened." She paused, watching his reaction carefully. His eyes flicked toward the folder, and a faint crease appeared on his forehead. "Dashcam footage?" he asked, his tone skeptical. "Yes," she replied calmly. "It records every detail, including that day. I can provide it if necessary." He leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together. "I see. Well, you understand that we take complaints seriously. We need to review all the evidence," she nodded. "I understand. I also want to make sure that the facts are clear and that nothing is misrepresented." For the next several minutes, he asked her questions, each one seemingly routine but carefully phrased in a way that could unsettle her. He suggested scenarios, hinted at errors she might have made, and tried to catch her in a slip of the tongue. She answered each question clearly, calmly, and truthfully. She refused to react with fear or frustration, knowing that any display of emotion could be twisted against her. Finally, he paused, tapping his pen on the desk. "You seem very prepared," he said almost reluctantly. "Most people in your position would be nervous, would make mistakes." She allowed herself a small, polite smile. "I want to be honest and cooperative. That's the best way to handle any situation." For the first time, she noticed a slight tension in his body, a flicker of doubt. She realized that her composure, combined with the evidence she had, was starting to undermine his control over the situation. He had expected fear, perhaps anger, or at least hesitation, but she had shown none. After what felt like hours, the conversation began to shift. The officer had to step out for a moment, leaving her alone in the office. She took the opportunity to review her notes again, recalling each detail from the original traffic stop. She made a mental note of every action, every word, and every subtle gesture from the officer. She knew that careful documentation could make all the difference if the situation escalated further. When he returned, his demeanor had changed slightly. There was still authority in his posture, but the edge of arrogance had softened. He reviewed the dashcam footage she had brought on a tablet, watching her actions during the stop. Her driving was steady, her reactions composed, and every word she had spoken was calm and polite. The evidence spoke clearly, contradicting the narrative he had attempted to create. She watched him closely, noticing how the tension in his face slowly gave way to frustration. The smug confidence he had shown on the street and in the office was being replaced by unease. She realized that the moment had shifted. The power he thought he held was slipping, and the truth was becoming undeniable. A few colleagues passed by in the hallway outside, glancing briefly into the office. Some were familiar with the officer's reputation. Others were simply curious. She didn't let it distract her. She knew that the situation was delicate, and she remained composed, waiting for the right moment to assert her truth clearly. The officer finally spoke. "The footage. It shows exactly what happened. There's no swerving, no unsafe driving. You've been cooperative the entire time." His voice was flat now, lacking the sharpness from before. She nodded calmly. "I hope this clarifies everything. I've always tried to follow the rules and act responsibly." There was a pause filled with tension. The office felt smaller, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves were waiting for the next move. She kept her hands on her lap, her posture poised and her expression neutral. The officer's confidence had eroded, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement of reality. Finally, he leaned back and sighed. I understand. There won't be any further action on this matter. I apologize for any inconvenience, though I know that doesn't undo the experience you had. She allowed herself a small, polite nod. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your acknowledgement." As she left the office, she felt a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. She had faced intimidation, bias, and unfair treatment, yet she had remained composed, patient, and prepared. Her evidence and careful demeanor had turned the situation around. She realized that truth and patience were powerful tools, capable of exposing injustice and challenging authority when it was misused. Outside the building, the sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the parking lot. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the cool evening air. The encounter had been stressful, even frightening at times, but she had emerged with her dignity intact. She felt a quiet sense of empowerment, knowing that her composure and truth had made a difference. She thought about the officer, about how arrogance and bias had almost led to injustice. She realized that many people faced similar situations every day, and that courage, preparation, and calmness could be the difference between being wronged and being vindicated. Her experience was personal, but it also had a broader significance, a lesson about integrity, patience, and the importance of evidence. As she drove home, her mind replayed the day's events. She reflected on how small actions, keeping calm, documenting carefully, and remaining truthful, had shifted the balance of power. She felt a quiet pride in herself, but also a renewed determination to share her experience, to help others understand that facing unfairness with patience and composure could lead to justice. By the time she reached her neighborhood, the streetlights were glowing softly, illuminating the quiet roads. She parked her car, stepped out, and felt the cool breeze against her face. The tension from the morning had begun to fade, replaced by a calm satisfaction. She had faced a challenge she hadn't asked for, handled it with dignity, and turned the situation in her favor. She knew that the story wasn't over. The officer had faced exposure, and perhaps accountability was now inevitable. But more importantly, she had demonstrated the power of composure, courage, and careful action. She understood that justice wasn't always immediate, but that integrity, truth, and preparation were formidable allies in the face of bias and intimidation. That night, she sat quietly in her living room, reflecting on everything. She thought about the moments when she had felt fear, the moments when The morning after the incident at the police station, the woman woke up with a mix of relief and apprehension. She had survived the encounter, but she knew that the officer's actions could not simply go unexamined. The dashcam footage, her careful notes, and the witnesses she had not even realized at the time were all tools that could hold him accountable. She had learned that sometimes justice required persistence, patience, and courage, and she was ready to take the next steps. After a quick breakfast, she decided to reach out to a local advocacy group she trusted. She explained what had happened, detailing the traffic stop, the intimidation, and the unfair complaint filed against her. The group listened carefully, asking questions, making notes, and expressing concern about the officer's behavior. They advised her on the proper steps: submit an official complaint, provide all evidence, and ensure there were witnesses to corroborate her story. She followed their guidance meticulously, making copies of the dashcam footage and her notes, and carefully documenting the names and contact details of anyone who had observed the incident. Meanwhile, word of the traffic stop began to spread quietly. A few people who had noticed the interaction on the street had shared what they saw with friends and neighbors. It wasn't viral news yet, but small ripples of attention started to form. She hadn't sought attention. She only wanted fairness. Yet the community's awareness became an unexpected ally. People who had seen how she handled the situation spoke of her composure, her patience, and the dignity with which she responded to intimidation. A few days later, the police department began its internal review. The officer, who had once acted with arrogance and assumed control, now found himself under scrutiny. Colleagues who had known about his behavior were surprised to see formal complaints being taken seriously. The same tactics he had used to intimidate others now became the focus of investigation. His name appeared in internal reports, and supervisors reviewed the dashcam footage. Each frame, each word, and each action that had been recorded revealed the contrast between his conduct and the woman's integrity. The officer tried to maintain his composure, but the shift was noticeable. Emails from supervisors requested explanations. Internal meetings were scheduled, and the evidence began to accumulate against him. The same authority he had wielded to intimidate now demanded accountability. He realized that the control he thought he had was slipping, and with it the comfort he had once taken in his position. He started to feel the weight of consequences, something he had rarely considered when acting on bias or arrogance. During this time, the woman continued her life carefully but with a heightened sense of awareness. She returned to her usual routine, driving to work, visiting the grocery store, and taking evening walks. She remained cautious but no longer fearful. There was a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had done everything right. She had stayed calm, documented evidence, and sought help when necessary. The injustice she had faced had not broken her spirit. Instead, it strengthened her resolve. As the investigation progressed, the officer's mistakes and misconduct became more apparent. Witness statements aligned with the dashcam footage, highlighting his attempts to fabricate a situation and intimidate her. Internal emails showed his frustration, impatience, and willingness to bend rules to suit his bias. Supervisors realized that his behavior had been documented long before this incident, and patterns of abuse of authority were emerging. What he thought was a simple, isolated interaction now revealed a much larger problem. The officer's colleagues began to distance themselves from him. Rumors of internal complaints spread, and people who had once ignored or tolerated his behavior now watched carefully, unwilling to be associated with someone under scrutiny. Even some who had previously respected his authority began to question his judgment and ethics. The isolation he experienced was a stark contrast to the control and confidence he had wielded during the traffic stop. Meanwhile, the woman received support from unexpected places. Friends, neighbors, and members of the advocacy group continued to check in, offering encouragement and solidarity. She felt a sense of community she hadn't fully realized before. People admired her calmness, her ability to handle intimidation with dignity, and her determination to ensure that justice was pursued. Their encouragement bolstered her confidence and reminded her that fairness and integrity could prevail even in the face of bias and abuse of power. The investigation took its course. With formal meetings, interviews, and internal hearings, the officer was asked to provide his account, but his version clashed with the evidence. Each piece of documented footage, each witness statement, and each careful note highlighted the contrast between his aggressive, biased behavior and the woman's composed, respectful actions. It became increasingly clear that his actions could not be justified, and the investigation moved toward formal disciplinary measures. As the days turned into weeks, the officer began to face real consequences. He received official warnings, was temporarily suspended from duty, and faced the possibility of further administrative action. The arrogance that had once defined him gave way to unease, and he began to understand, perhaps for the first time, that authority was not a shield from accountability. Every action had a consequence, and his attempt to manipulate and intimidate an innocent woman had triggered those consequences. The woman, aware of these developments, felt a quiet sense of vindication. She had not sought revenge or sought to humiliate the officer. Her goal had always been fairness and truth. Yet, the natural unfolding of events, the accountability of the system, the support of witnesses, and the undeniable evidence meant that justice was being served. She understood that her calm, measured response had been key to this outcome. Her composure had not only protected her, but had also exposed the misuse of power. During this period, small moments of recognition began to appear in her daily life. People who had witnessed the original traffic stop expressed admiration for her courage. Local community members shared stories of others who had faced similar situations and used her example as guidance. She began to see that her experience, while deeply personal, had broader significance. It was not just about one officer or one traffic stop. It was about integrity, vigilance, and the importance of standing firm against injustice. The officer, facing increasing scrutiny and the loss of credibility, became a cautionary example. His attempts to assert control, intimidate, and manipulate were documented for all to see. He could no longer rely on bias, fear, or authority to achieve his goals. Each report, each piece of evidence, and each witness statement chipped away at his previous power. The lesson was clear. Abusing authority for personal prejudice would not go unchallenged. The woman's life gradually returned to a sense of normalcy. She went about her daily routine with a renewed awareness of her strength and resilience. Driving felt safer. not because the world had changed, but because she had changed. She carried with her a quiet confidence, the understanding that truth, composure, and preparation were powerful tools against injustice. She no longer felt the lingering tension from the original stop. It had been replaced by empowerment. Meanwhile, the officer's career faced ongoing uncertainty. Supervisors considered formal disciplinary measures, retraining programs, and restrictions on his authority. Colleagues who had once relied on his position began to question their trust in him. The consequences of his actions extended beyond that single traffic stop, impacting his reputation, his credibility, and his future within the department. The same arrogance that had led him to target the woman had now set the stage for his downfall. The broader community began to recognize the situation as well. Local news outlets, without sensationalism, covered the incident as an example of accountability and vigilance. People discussed the importance of evidence, witnesses, and composure in challenging unfair treatment. The woman's experience became a quiet symbol of resilience, demonstrating that courage and careful action could lead to justice, even against those in positions of authority. Through it all, the woman remained humble and focused. She did not seek praise, recognition, or attention. Her goal had always been fairness and truth. Yet the support she received and the positive outcome reminded her that standing firm against intimidation was both necessary and possible. Her actions had not only protected her, but it also contributed to a culture of accountability and vigilance. In the weeks that followed, the officer's actions were formally reviewed, and consequences were enforced. He faced reprimands, temporary suspension, and mandatory oversight. The evidence against him was clear and undeniable. The same tactics he had used to manipulate, intimidate, and assert power were now documented as reasons for disciplinary measures. The situation served as a clear example that abuse of authority carried consequences, and that integrity, calmness, and documentation could lead to justice. The woman, reflecting on the entire experience, felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not because she had won against the officer in a personal sense, but because fairness had prevailed. Integrity had triumphed over intimidation. Evidence had spoken louder than arrogance. Patience had proven stronger than manipulation. And in her heart she knew that the experience had strengthened her, making her more raw. The days after the officer faced consequences passed quietly, but they were filled with a sense of reflection for the woman. Life returned to its familiar rhythms: work, errands, evening walks. But now she carried a renewed awareness of her own strength. She realized that the experience had changed her in subtle ways. She was more alert, more confident, and more certain that she could face challenges without letting fear or anger take control. Even small moments, like driving through her neighborhood or stopping at a local store, reminded her of what had happened. She remembered the tension of the traffic stop, the calculated hostility of the officer, and the weight of feeling unfairly targeted. Yet she also remembered her own composure, the dashcam footage, the witnesses, and the careful notes that had turned the situation in her favor. Each memory reinforced the lesson that preparation, integrity, and patience were powerful tools in the face of injustice. She began to share her story quietly with friends, neighbors, and coworkers. She did not seek attention or praise. Her goal was to help others understand the importance of staying calm and documenting events when faced with intimidation or unfair treatment. People listened attentively, asking questions about how she had managed to remain composed and how she had collected evidence. Her experience became a source of guidance and encouragement for those who had faced or feared similar situations. At work, her colleagues noticed a subtle change in her demeanor. She carried herself with quiet confidence, no longer easily shaken by small stressors. When conversations turned to fairness, justice, or authority, she spoke thoughtfully, offering insights drawn from her own experience. She realized that the encounter had not only tested her patience, but had also strengthened her ability to navigate difficult interactions with composure and clarity. Community members also recognized her courage. Those who had witnessed the original traffic stop, or who had learned about the officer's misconduct, expressed admiration for how she had handled the situation. Some even reached out to share their own experiences of facing bias or unfair treatment, grateful for her example. She responded with kindness, empathy, and encouragement, emphasizing the importance of patience, truth, and documenting events carefully. Her story became a quiet symbol of resilience, not because of confrontation, but because of how she had handled intimidation with dignity. Meanwhile, the officer's career continued to face challenges. The internal investigation and disciplinary actions remained on record, and his reputation suffered among colleagues and in the community. The same authority he had used to intimidate now carried consequences he could not escape. He had assumed control and power in a single encounter, but the ripple effects of that misuse of power had grown far beyond what he had anticipated. Though he had once acted with arrogance, he now faced the reality of accountability. Meetings with supervisors, discussions of policy violations, and reviews of previous incidents reminded him that his actions had consequences. Each evaluation, each documented complaint chipped away at the control he had assumed he held. The imbalance of power had shifted, and the outcome highlighted the importance of integrity over intimidation. The woman, aware of these developments, did not feel triumph or anger. She had never sought to punish the officer personally. Her goal had always been fairness and truth, yet she could not ignore the satisfaction that came from seeing justice unfold naturally. The system, combined with her own careful actions and the support of witnesses, had held the officer accountable. It was a quiet but powerful form of resolution, demonstrating that actions taken in arrogance and bias ultimately meet consequences. Her life continued, and with each passing day, the memory of the traffic stop became a story of growth rather than fear. She continued her work, maintained her routine, and engaged with her community with renewed awareness. Her sense of vigilance remained, but it was tempered with confidence. She knew that life would always present challenges, but she had learned that composure, preparation, and integrity could guide her through even the most difficult situations. She also found herself reflecting on the broader implications of the experience. It was clear that bias and abuse of authority were not isolated incidents. Many people face similar challenges, and the key to addressing these situations lay in a combination of awareness, documentation, and courage. She began thinking about ways to support others, whether through conversation, guidance, or simply sharing her experience as an example of how to navigate injustice. Community events and local discussions began to highlight the importance of accountability in positions of authority. Her story, shared quietly among neighbors and friends, contributed to a broader awareness of how bias and misconduct could be addressed. People began to see that individuals who acted with composure and documented evidence could influence outcomes, and that courage did not always require confrontation or aggression. Over time, she noticed a subtle shift in the way people around her approached authority. Conversations included reminders to remain calm, observe carefully, and speak truthfully. She realized that her experience had contributed to a small but meaningful change in community awareness. People were learning that fairness and accountability were not abstract concepts. They were practical tools that could guide interactions in daily life. The officer, meanwhile, continued to navigate the consequences of his actions. His suspension and oversight remained in effect, and he faced continued scrutiny from supervisors. The arrogance and bias that had led him to target the woman were now part of his professional record, influencing how colleagues in the department viewed him. Each day brought a reminder that misuse of authority was not without repercussions. The woman, reflecting on all of this, understood that her experience had a lasting impact. It was not just about a single traffic stop or one officer's misconduct. It was about the power of composure, preparation, and truth in challenging unfair treatment. It was about demonstrating that integrity could withstand intimidation and bias, and it was about showing that individuals, even in ordinary circumstances, could influence outcomes by acting thoughtfully and courageously. As weeks turned into months, she felt a sense of closure. The immediate threat was gone. The officer faced accountability, and her own actions had been vindicated. Yet she also understood that vigilance was an ongoing responsibility. Life would continue to present challenges, both large and small, and the lessons she had learned, patience, documentation, and composure, would guide her in the future. She continued to drive, to work, and to live her life with a sense of quiet empowerment. Encounters that might have caused fear or frustration in the past now became opportunities to practice patience and careful observation. She knew that not every interaction would be fair, but she had proven to herself that fairness could be pursued, even when faced with intimidation. Her community continued to recognize the importance of her example. People spoke quietly about the value of evidence, patience, and integrity. Friends and neighbors shared stories of their own challenges, often reflecting on how her experience had provided guidance or reassurance. She became a symbol not because of confrontation, but because of her ability to maintain dignity in the face of unfairness. In the evenings, she often reflected on the lessons she had learned. Life could be unpredictable and unfair, but composure, preparation, and courage were constants she could rely on. She realized that true strength was not in aggression or dominance, but in the ability to face challenges calmly, document carefully, and act with integrity. These lessons, hard-earned and deeply felt, would remain with her forever. She also thought about the officer, not with anger, but with understanding that actions have consequences. The arrogance and bias that had motivated him had led to his downfall. His experience was a reminder that misuse of power carries consequences, and that accountability is an essential part of fairness. In her reflection, she felt a sense of closure, knowing that justice had unfolded without her needing to resort to confrontation or malice. Over time, the incident became a story she shared as part of her life's lessons. She spoke of it when discussing fairness, integrity, and navigating difficult situations. She emphasized calmness, documentation, and seeking support when necessary. Her experience became a quiet guide for others, showing that even ordinary people, when acting thoughtfully and courageously, could influence outcomes and uphold justice. The neighborhood, the friends, and the community slowly absorbed these lessons. Conversations included reminders to observe carefully, act truthfully, and stand firm with dignity. Her story served as an example, not of conflict but of resilience, patience, and empowerment. People realized that fairness could be pursued through careful action, and that even in the face of authority and bias, individuals could protect themselves and seek accountability. As she moved forward, she felt gratitude for her own strength and for the support she had received. She had faced an intimidating situation, documented evidence, maintained composure, and relied on her integrity. These actions had ensured a just outcome, not just for herself but as an example for others. She understood that fairness and courage could influence even the most difficult situations, and that integrity was a powerful force in the face of intimidation. The officer's store.